talk with the people, it's. I just wanted to say it's very, I'm very happy to have you all here. I'd say this is. I would say this is somehow like a milestone in a process that we have started a couple of years ago together with Andreas, Jen, Caro, Philip, Gianluca Manza was involved for one of the sessions, if I remember correctly. I might have forgotten somebody. No, I haven't, I guess. Christina now is co-chairing, right, a session with Jen at the next social simulation conference. But just to say that we've been, trying to put this these two communities that Flaminio was mentioning for a couple of years now, mainly by organizing sessions at Sunbelt Conference, European Social Network Conference, Social Simulation Conference. So yeah, it's very good to have many of the people who also have presented in those sessions and people who haven't, but maybe might want to consider doing it in the future in the same room. So I'd like to to join Flaminio by saying welcome. Sorry for the bad weather, but this is something that we couldn't really do anything about it. So it's going to be quite a long day, and we're going to talk of a lot of things. I guess from the program we'll have mainly talks about empirical contributions of applications of the interaction of agent-based modeling and social network analysis, which is great, which is which is I think a sign of the fact that that there's people out there doing this, not just talking about it. What I'll do now is mainly talk about it, because I thought as a starting because I thought as a starting contribution of this workshop, I thought about first of all saying a couple of things that might sound a little bit that that might sound nothing innovative for you, for most of you guys here in the room, but thinking of the many people that who are connected online and the PhD students that we have in this room, I thought it could be a good idea to say a couple of ground, to talk about a couple of ground concepts about agent-based modeling and social network research, and then I'll try to make a couple of points that I hope will foster some discussion. I'll try to keep room for discussion during after my talk. I don't want to promise too much, because every time I promise, then I fail to stay in time. So I won't. But yeah, I'd be very glad if we could start discussing about a couple of points that I think are very important to see. To think of the future of the interaction, the integration of agent-based modeling in social network research, if not now, maybe in the rest of the day and also tomorrow. By the way, tomorrow we're going to have a final a closing discussion session at the end of the workshop, so that also could be a good a good opportunity to discuss a little bit more. So no, not yet the Coleman board. No, it's I know it's sometimes it's kind of, it might be kind of lame to start with the Coleman board, but I still haven't found anything that fits, that visualizes this idea better. So yeah, I don't think it's lame. It's a classic, right? But my point here would be that the main reason why I personally think that agent-based modeling should be integrated more into social network research is because, as social scientists, and more specifically as scholars interested in explaining social networks, what we should look for is to identify the causal mechanisms that explain the evolution of the social network, right? Which is something that I think at a very superficial level we might all agree about, okay? Because you know, the causal mechanism concept could be defined in such a wide, you know, in such a wide range of ways that everybody would probably agree about that. But my more specific point would be that, you know, if we go after causal mechanisms, if we don't just, if we're not content with describing and explaining, you know, the processes that underlie social network evolution, but we want to go deeper into causal mechanisms, the way they were defined, you know, in the now classic analytical sociology literature, then we should not forget to go after motives, individual motives behind decisions. So individual motives behind decisions of establishing, maintaining, or deleting, or you know, disrupting social relationships. So by saying that we should not forget that our job is to identify the causal mechanisms, I'm trying to make a point here that we should not forget about the individual motives behind decisions, desires and preferences of actors, which come in interaction with context framing, okay, which calls, you know, calls on the stage also the cognition and culture element that sometimes are kind of neglected in social network research, and also the different types of ties, because you know, because we've now kind of reached a very advanced point in social network modeling, in social network research. But I have the feeling, and I'm, you know, I'd be very much curious about what you guys think about it, that we sometimes tend to apply models without really reflecting on the kind of ties that we're modeling. Okay? So the different types of ties, the different types of instrumental or expressive ties that then come with different motives behind decisions and different framing of the content, different framing also of the kind of relationship. So this kind of more or less refined common boat, well, refined might be a bit arrogant. So, but that's a different version of the common boat. So when we model social networks, we're more or less we're here and we're trying to see if we find micro-level processes that underlie the evolution of a social network. What I think we should not neglect if we want to really go after causal mechanisms is actors' framing of their relationships, of the networks of the kind of networks they're in, not just in terms of structures, but also in terms of what kind of relationships am I in. And depending on the kind of relationship I am in with the other people in my neighborhood, I might have different motives, and I might frame the context differently. So if we share this idea of a social network research that really want to go deeper into causal mechanisms of social network evolution, we might still want to, you know, to look for different models that could somehow complement to the very sophisticated array of statistical models that we already have. Okay, because in some contexts, in some situations, statistical models can only provide underdetermined evidence of causal mechanisms. Okay, the idea is this one. So I borrowed, for example, Christoph's and Viviana's idea of network mechanisms, or also what Gary Robbins called network patterns. When we go after those patterns, those network mechanisms, sometimes when we use statistical models, we sometimes cannot do more than finding evidence of the micro level processes that could be responsible of the local configurations that we can count in our social networks. Okay, but for example, I've made this example with this example of concerning reciprocity. If we want to identify reciprocation processes in a network, we kind of look for the incidence or prevalence of local configurations like those ones, so complete dyads, okay? And we might interpret that as an evidence of some unobserved underlying process going on, okay? Like a T0 I sends a tie to J, and a T1 J sends back a tie to I. But the reasons why J sends back a tie to I might be very different. I came up with just 3 examples. Like, underlying reciprocation, there might be, the idea of complying to a solidarity norm. For example, I help you and you help me back, because we all share the fact that because J frames the context in a way that interprets the network as a group, where a in-group solidarity norm holds, okay, and J might think that he or she wants to comply to that norm, okay, and that's the reason why J then helps I back. But even if there were no norm, okay, or even if J didn't frame the relationships like that, there might still be reciprocation back, because J might decide that he or she wants to strategically invest in the relationship with I, okay, to reap future benefits from I's availability to help J back. Or maybe there is a norm, or maybe independently of the fact that the norm is there or not, maybe J does interpret the concept, the context, does frame the context as one in which a norm of solidarity is there, but maybe J might not want to comply to the norm, okay, but still wants to reciprocate back because he or she wants to be in control of his or her reputation, doesn't want to, show up like the guy who didn't comply to the norm. Okay, these are very simple examples of why underlying different relational processes that we might find evidence of through statistical models. There might be different mechanisms, different causal mechanisms at play. And this lies on the very idea that's very powerful, and that's what what led all our colleagues who were instrumental in developing the statistical models that are now available. Some of them are here in this group. And this relies on the very idea of interpreting the so-called archaeological traces, which is something that's a concept that I've always found very very clear, and that I guess Flache and colleagues in the 2013 book on ergons borrow from Harris and White. So the very idea of looking for the prevalence or incidence of archaeological traces to get evidence of those unobserved processes, and this makes those models mathematically tractable. The likelihood functions of those models mathematically tractables, and parameters that can be easily estimated via robust algorithms, as we all know, like maximum likelihood or the method of modes. These kind of models, I don't know what he actually thinks about it, but I think that they fit very well the definition of methodological models that John Skvorec, I've never really learned how to pronounce.
Skvorec.
Okay, thank you. You told me already, but then I forgot. But I found in this 1991 paper that probably most of you know already, that the difference between methodological, sorry, and theoretical models very insightful. So the methodological models, and there's something similar also by Sørensen in 1998. So those are I think he called them statistical, more plainly statistical models. So those models whose aim is to find internal associations within data, right? This is exactly what the statistical models for social networks actually do. Agent-based modeling requires a kind of different, maybe paradigm is too strong a word, but a whole different approach to what a model can do. Okay, and I think that agent-based models could relate to the category of theoretical models that John Scords used to juxtapose to methodological models. Because agent-based models, which we, the shared definition is one of the shared definitions I'm providing here in the slide, exactly because their aim is to model a population of actors with their specific properties, actors that are interdependent and then act and interact upon a set of behavioral rules within certain environmental constraints. They are first and foremost models of logical propositions, right? So instead of looking at internal associations within aggregate level data, what agent-based models do, first and foremost, is to translate, let's say, logical or numerical propositions of a theory, which is assumed to explain an empirical phenomenon, into a model. And another point I'd like to make is that if we accept the idea of a social network research that goes up to causal mechanisms, so this kind of models, exactly because they're theoretical and their aim is to model the theory. So the causal mechanism that we assume explains a phenomenon we want to study. They can do that by actually mirroring all the elements that we want to identify in a causal mechanism. Okay, I borrowed that actually from Gianluca Manzo. So in the real mechanism, which is out there in social reality that we want to study, there's actors, their properties, their interactions, their relationships. In an agent-based model, we want to model actors that we actually call agents in agent-based models, in the usual agent-based modeling jargon. Those agents have attributes. Based on those attributes and rules of behavior, they interact, and they do so within a set of structural, spatial, institutional constraints. So there is a kind of what Gianluca Manzo in 2013 called a structural homology between agent-based modeling and the concept of the theoretical models of causal mechanism. Fair enough. But then again, so my idea would be that, my obsession for causal mechanisms is because I think it's now the time to try to get back actors' motives, actors' cognition, and actors' culture in framing relationships back into the way we model social networks. And what agent-based modeling can do with a structural homology with causal mechanisms is exactly to represent those cognitive or cultural constituents of actors' decisions, the social interactions, and those kind of constraints. They can do so because, being first and foremost theoretical computational models, okay, that translate a theory into a computer software, they're very flexible. And being very flexible from a computational point of view, they can arrange a wide range of granularity of agent modeling, right? Most of us know the classic classification between the many kind of characteristics of agents that can be modeled through agent-based modeling. Some of them are social, some of them are cognitive. So among the social characteristics, agents' autonomy, interdependence, embeddedness, heterogeneity. But I think even more interesting, the cognitive characteristics of agents. We're able to model reactive agents, proactive agents. We're able to model kinds of bounded rationality that's based on a range of heuristics from the simplest ones to the more complex ones, and agents that are adaptive. And so my point here, and this is where I actually would love to have your feedback, and I'm very curious about your thoughts about this, is that we could try, it's time to push agent-based modeling into the array of tools that we can use in social network research to model social networks, as they can complement some of the limitations of the statistical models that are available for social network research. First of all, agent-based models are agent-based, right? And differently from those models that stem from the ERGM family, let's say, which are tie-based, they're not indifferent to specific tie sequences through which the local configurations that emerge in a network can be detected, right? As in the 2019 article by Per Bloch, based on Ttis and Tom Snyder's, where they showed that the very agent-based structure of stochastic actor-oriented models allowed us researchers to actually model the correct sequences through which we can interpret local configurations, like, for example, a transitive triplet, like the one on the top right, as the outcome of a transitive closure process. Okay. But I think that agent-based models could do something more also compared to stochastic actor-oriented models, which are somehow a class of agent-based models. I think that we all agree about that, and mainly because of the limitations that come with the power of such models. Okay? To be so powerful, stochastic actor-oriented models, need to be mathematically tractable. In order to be mathematically tractable, sometimes they have to rely on such assumptions, like, for example, geometrically weighted configurations, or in degree popularity, this kind of local configurations that implicitly assume that agents' access to information is available on the whole network, okay? Which might be a plausible assumption in some contexts, for some kinds of relationships. I'm thinking friendship networks in a classroom, for example, that I wouldn't find that an unplausible assumption. But it might be an unplausible assumption for larger networks, for example. For competitive contexts, I'm thinking of the work that I had the pleasure to collaborate with Francesco Renzini and Flaminio on advice-seeking networks. So if you think of advice-seeking networks, for example, think of the classic Lazegas advice-seeking network. That's quite a large consultancy firm. It's a very competitive context. It could be safely assumed that people might want to conceal the information about who they're advising, who is asking for advice because of status dynamics and because of all the things that we know as social scientists, right? So that assumption might not be plausible in such a competitive context like that. Sales needs to rely on the assumption that agents, you very well know, that agents can change. Well, can consider only consider changing only one time at a time, right? Which, of course, is one of the reasons why we can so cleanly estimate parameters and uncertainty measures of stochastic actor-oriented models. But at the same time, it prevents modeling coordination. Maybe it makes very difficult modeling coordination between agents, unless we use more, let's say, more sophisticated versions that come from the stochastic actor-oriented model family, like Dynam, for example. Cascade dynamics, for example, which are usually which can sometimes stem from threshold-based preferences, right? So agents in that case should be able to change multiple ties at a time to explicitly model cascade dynamics. Another couple of things that are more difficult to model with statistical models. Tie selection in stochastic actor-oriented models is operated by agents through a multinomial choice, right? Which is based on preference optimization, which might not be plausible for some kind of cognitive state relations. I'm borrowing Steve Borgatti's classification of the types of ties. So think of those modeling, for example, liking ties between different people, or status attribution. Okay? Those are relationships that model cognitive states, where it is less plausible to think that agents perform a multinomial choice between the people who they like. Stochastic myopia, which makes it very difficult to model backward-looking rationality learning processes, but also forward-looking rationality. So these are all elements that makes it for statistical models a bit difficult to go deeper in modeling actors' behavior, the different kind of types of ties that we want to study in social network research, and the way that context is framed. And this is actually what agent-based modeling instead can do. I'm skipping the part where I'm talking about the couple of empirical examples I've been working on with Flaminio and Francesco, because I'm pretty sure that Francesco will talk about this or with more detail in his talk. But the point is that all this can be overcome by the fact that we have models that are theoretical in principle. But the point of being theoretical doesn't prevent agent-based models to be empirical, right? But they can become empirical models by applying the so-called generativist method that goes back to Joshua Epstein, right? Which consists in sequential complexification of the model mechanism until the empirical data set is fitted. We now have methods to actually compute point estimates and uncertainty measures of parameters of agent-based models, even of those models whose likelihood functions are mathematically intractable. This is something that couldn't be done in the early contributions of agent-based modeling in social network research. I'm thinking of the 90s, but it's something that can be done today, or at least it's something that that research where there is room, for further research. So think I'm leaving the time for a couple of questions, hoping that you have some. But you know, again, extending you know, my pleasure of having every one of you here for this workshop. Yeah, I'd like to summarize a couple of points that I've tried to make. Maybe I should use the mic, or I don't know, maybe I should try to talk more of the. But the point being, agent-based modeling can explicitly model causal mechanisms, okay? But yet the explanatory power of those mechanisms can be empirically tested, okay? And we can do so by having more realistic but yet more parsimonious models. And this is one point that I'm very, you know, that I really like. I think the point, and I'm really curious about your thoughts about this, is that agent-based modeling allows us to model the unobserved, right? Because we're not actually counting configurations or network configurations in a network data set, but we're modeling those processes that cannot be traced back in a one-to-one way to a statistic that can be computed in a network data set. So the question is, to what extent and how? Yes. Thank you very much.
So we have 4 minutes kindly saved Federico for questions. And Raffaele, please check if there are any questions online. So please. Andreas, you're literally like, the question was shaping your face.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Federico. I think this is a great kickoff for this workshop. Yeah, let me try to speak for something that maybe gives reason for discussion. So in a sense, very simplistic, I could say, okay, you argue we can link agent-based models more to empirical data, and we can actually test their implications, which I obviously would agree with. But then you say the great thing about them is we can modeling unobserved things. Isn't there a bit of a logical tension? If we cannot observe something, how could we ever empirically test the mechanism we are assuming if we cannot observe its elements? I'm sure you know the answer, know an answer, but
I know an answer. Should I?
Yes, please. Just.
I think that's the key of it. I think that's the key point, and I'd really like to give more. I think that the idea we've been working on in the behaviour lab about this will be clearer once Francesco talks about a couple of ideas that we have thought about. There are methods that we can use to compute point estimates and even uncertainty measures of parameters, even those parameters that relate to unobserved processes. But the point would be we're always after, even if we don't use agent-based models and even if we use statistical models, we're always after unobserved. Because in the end, we're trying to, as Harrison White said, all we can do is to look at a network data set, right, which is a cross-section or a longitudinal network data set. And then we can speculate, right, about the unobserved past processes or processes in between, the data points that have generated those data points. If we just rely, even if we use a statistical model and we then interpret the evidence of the prevalence or incidence of some local configurations as evidence of causal mechanisms, we sometimes do a big, a big jump. Okay.
So if I may myself, just contribute to this.
There's also a question.
Okay. Yeah. Yes.
I think also related. I'm going to try and give an interpretation here of the question whether there are specific data sets that could be used to validate possible causal mechanisms that you want to model with ABMs. So I guess the question here is what's the empirical counterpart in practice to what you said, or do we need to collect more data to do what you're talking about?
This links to my reaction to Andreas. Can
Okay.
probably accommodate us. I mean, hopefully not. I mean, modestly. The question is that, yeah, that's a very good point. It says that, but this is not, in my opinion, problem of methods, right? It's a problem that there will be plenty of unobservable mechanisms if we want to open the black box of cognition, for instance, how people. But this is more a strategy. So you might try to reproduce in an experimental framework something similar to the natural formation challenge that you have in your model, right? To try to discover which are those plausible behavioral mechanisms that lead people to generate those exactly natural mechanisms that you have maybe on which you have to find in your ABM, right? And by analogy, if you make some analogy, which are probably reasonably, then you might probably infer that this kind of unobserved mechanism that you have in your data could probably be approached in terms of more empirically or experimentally grounded mechanisms that you assume that typically, realistically, plausibly are those ones that generate your network. But this is more a strategy of mixing the lab or other type of methods for getting data on similar context, similar challenge, and then reach your model to reduce a little bit the kind of theoretical aspects that you inform your ABM and put it more in terms of grounded, experimentally grounded, plausible assumptions about cognitive mechanisms that you can't really have in your data, right? That's my probably guess. Yeah.
Just a brief. I'm totally with you on that, and I really welcome this comment and this discussion, because I think this idea that we need to make theoretical assumptions about things we cannot observe, but then use our models to try to generate implications which we then can actually test, has gotten a bit lost in the onslaught of big data, great statistical methods.
Yeah.
But it never goes away.
Never.
So I think that's why a big reason why we need this kind of research. Yeah.
Hope that this also goes in the direction of the question in the chat.
I think I should give the floor to the. Yeah, sorry. No, I just
turning yourself.
Yeah.
Then you will share the next one. You'll be power.
No, I thought I had to.
Now it's your. So thank you very much, Federico, for the presentation. The second speaker is Takacs from the University. Yeah. Yes, we need to close this one. Yeah, I'm interrupting. Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Do you see it on Zoom as well?
Yeah, we see.
So welcome everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to present here. It's my pleasure. Thanks for the organizers for this nice event. And actually, my presentation will be something similar to Federico's. It's going to be a meta presentation rather than a presentation, and meta presentation in the sense that I'm talking about the kind of a review of agent-based models in social network analysis, and also kind of perspectives of agent-based models in social networks, and also starting from the same principles. But we can also recognize some slight differences. This is the original common mode, and also the original common mode in which what you have at the macro level at the end is basically a social phenomenon. So it's not networks, but social phenomenon. Of course, we are also interested in networks. We want to explain networks, but we, as a social scientist, we're primarily interested in explaining problems that occur at the macro level, so like inequality, conflict, also cooperation, and other important problems that we have to solve. For instance, global warming or other things. Of course, for this kind of questions, we have to use the micro level to find the mechanisms that are at between individuals, within individual actions, and within individual interactions. That is also the key part of methodology proposed by James Gorman. Of course, there are also refinements of this Gorman mode recently by the introduction of Peter Hedström's tradition, like this is by Petri Ilikowski. You can recognize that there is an arrow going back from behaviors to agents, and of course this is probably very relevant for this community because when we are talking about individual actions that have consequences, of course there is always some feedback on the agents themselves, and we know that this kind of feedback mechanisms takes place, and in very different forms. The agent decisions, but also the opportunities, the beliefs, and also the motives are influenced by the consequences of their actions. So there is such a feedback, and of course, also important that this is not within the individual. We are talking about more individuals that are here as agents, and the behavior of one individual can have an impact on a behavior on another agent, and also the outcome of this behavior can have all the motives or preferences or even the opportunities of that are constraining the decisions of the first agent. So this is when interaction really takes place in this individualistic framework, methodologically individualistic framework. And of course, for this lower level, we can also simplify this a little bit to get closer to the work that we do. That of course agents influence the behaviors not just of themselves but also of others. So this is something like influence, and also there is also the agents select who are the relevant agents that they are going to interact. So that's kind of something like selection. So at the micro mechanism level, the influence and selection is also taking place, and the interdependence, the constraining of individual decisions and actions are continuously with the feedback mechanisms are taking place, and at the end they have consequences at the macro level. Some of these consequences are intended, some of these consequences are unintended. Of course, unintended consequences are sometimes even more interesting than intended ones because they are the puzzles of social life. So how can we grow, for instance, social cooperation at a very large scale level? This is one of the problems that we try to solve. How can we avoid large-scale intergroup conflict? But when you look at the agents' motives, constraints, preferences, actions, and interactions, and also the feedback that takes place between the individuals, sometimes these macro consequences are very difficult to grow. And of course, then we have to come up with alternative words or imaginary words, or also with some kind of thought experiments that we try to grow those kind of words at the macro level that we would like to live in. So these are harmonized words with large-scale cooperation and no conflict. And what kind of actions, opportunities, and also interactions can lead to these kind of consequences. So part of this exercise is actually not about factual data, but also about imaginary data or imaginary societies or ideal worlds. But it's still within the same framework. Okay, but this is probably helpful to get into social network analysis, the relation to this analytical topological framework. But it's probably not just this. Of course, interdependence is much more than just selection and influence. And I think that's where game theory comes into the picture. So that influence and selection is also about the strategic interactions that individuals have. And this is sometimes missed in the social network literature, that the interactions and the interdependencies are about obtaining utility or some kind of payoffs that is also present in some kind of modeling in the social network literature. But these payoffs and utilities are not independent of what others do or what others have in mind that I do, and that's why they do something else. So basically, this is a much more complex and strategic in the sense that if this interdependence is not just about influence and selection, but about something in the cognitive level that is taking into account what the others think and what the others have as intelligence. So this leads to the my categorization of this literature, and it's kind of a meta-analysis part of today, is that basically when we are modeling social dynamics and we have agent-based models of very rich traditions within social networks, these are basically two kinds of traditions. One tradition is basically about individual decisions, attitudes, and behavior. And within this framework, the very clear example that I have is the very rich literature on opinion dynamics. And of course, I have, for instance, Andras here, but this is one example from Atzero. But of course, the dissemination of culture is a classical example that is probably a very illustrative to the societal problem at the societal level, and how can you grow basically a multicultural society from very simple assumptions that actually driving you towards consensus otherwise. Of course, in most opinion dynamics, there are very clear results about the convergence towards consensus, and we are going to get back to this later. But maybe surprising to you, but I also put some other kind of modeling in this kind of tradition, basically the model of social influence and network selection. So basically, SOMs are very similar to a large extent to dynamics, opinion dynamics models, because they are about individual decisions are made as a result of social influence, and individuals also selecting the interaction part. So basically, this is also happening in opinion dynamics models, but with sometimes very different assumptions. And of course, there's very nice people also working on this. So basically, what we have here is as common that the individual actions or attributes, rather. So the node attributes, so like for instance, an opinion, is a result of influence, basically adopted from the environment, and at the same time, or in addition to this, because some models are stopping here, especially opinion dynamics models, they also the connections are up. So basically, these two key elements are part of these models, and basically you generate the dynamics from these elementary micromechanisms. And the other world is basically considering games at the micro level, games and interactions. For instance, a cooperation game or a coordination game, and this is happening between the individuals, and they try to optimize the network in a sense that they would like to maximize the gain. Or Matthew Jackson's tradition, mainly from economics, is describing this world. Of course, it can also get more complicated once you think that it's not just individual actions and individual interactions with dyadic interactions that are taking place, but also more like interactions and games that are played between end players. And some games are played between just dyadically and the lower level. And also you could have, for instance, joint actions, which is also not really part of the traditional game theoretical, which I'm just already extending this towards some coalition formation games, for instance. They also could be considered as words of social dynamics that are using very often, actually more and more often, not typically actually at the moment, more and more agent-based modeling. And what happens here is basically that individuals have a strategy, and this strategy is basically improved step by step, either by evolutionary algorithm or by learning from the neighbors. And then learning from the neighbors, then networks come into the picture. So if it is just like there is a replicator dynamics at the population level, then there are no networks. But once you learn from the neighbors, and once you learn your strategy, or you improve your strategy, learning from the actions and actually payoffs of your partners, improve your strategy based on what you observe is useful in your surrounding, then basically you will have a network effect. And also, of course, also here, what happens that you probably want to avoid some interactions because that is not going to give you very good pay. So basically, there is also strategic incentives to build your network or delete some ties. And then we are somewhere close to what we have seen on the other world, is that we are talking about individual actions and individual ties. And at the same time, also to some extent, something beyond the individual level, having coalitions among players. Okay, so this is again just as a recap. This is one part of the world. I consider one part of the world of modeling social dynamics, and this is the other part of the world that I consider very different from this world, as that is also modeling social dynamics using agent-based modeling to a large extent. Maybe agent-based models are used more to the left, but I'm not sure because there are a lot of cooperation and coordination games also that are using agent-based models, and to some extent the networks. So basically, these are two worlds. Of course, to some extent there are overlaps already, but typically they are very separated, so they don't really communicate with each other. How can they communicate with each other? Of course, we see some examples also in this room that Francesco and Federico's Flavius work is mentioned, but also there are also other examples that in which to some elements of games and interactions are integrated basically in the decisions and behavior world. So, for instance, by adding some certain effects in or certain mechanisms into the modeling framework that are more strategic in the sense that not just taking into account immediate myopic utility maximization of each agent, but also selecting, for instance, better network selection of better performance. So you are looking around whose utility is higher, and then basically you are building a tie to that person. Or you are influenced more by those who are better performance. So it's not the average author, but a person who has achieved a higher utility, you are influenced more by that person than by. This can be implemented very easily in existing modeling frameworks. So basically performance-based popularity and also by social influence by better performance and not the average performer. So, and of course, there are also other ways. So that exists. For instance, in opinion dynamics models, there are you can also build models that are agents are hypocrites to some extent. So they act as if they had certain opinions towards certain agents, and they act differently toward other agents because those agents accept those kind of opinions to be expressed. So the expressed opinion would be different than the true opinion, and there are some models like this. So also, of course, you can also think of conditional actions in this kind of framework that are conditioning behavior to the some attributes of the partners. For instance, reputation. Of course, reputation is something that is really clear. So if one person has a good reputation, then probably that you are going to behave differently towards that person. Also, you might want to use just, for instance, punishment or some kind of certain actions towards some individuals, or for instance, violate the social norms. But also, you could think of even more complex social norms that you want to reward the punishers of bad guys, or you want to reward the rewarders of punishers of bad guys. So these kind of social norms, higher order social norms, could potentially be implemented, and some models actually within this leading edge norms literature that are about the social norms that are therefore in the cooperation games seem to work well at a large scale in implementing already this kind of higher order social norm behavior. Of course, you can also think of different the more complex strategies that are tailored to different partners. And a third kind of complication that comes to this kind of models is learning models. Of course, you can learn from your own experience, but you can also learn from the local experience. So that can also learning can take place in the network neighborhood. So then it becomes basically also social network-based learning, which is less typical, I think, in the models. More typical is to have individual learning and collective learning at the larger scale. But of course, when networks are important and networks are important, then this is probably most relevant, at least for this community, that you can also learn what is the experience of your neighbors. So basically, not just like you have some kind of cognition that is able to integrate in the modeling what happened to your neighbors in the recent past, and then you actually update your behavior based on this. And one more way is actually, it's probably even a more complicated way to integrate, but it's actually getting this part of the world very close to the right part of the world, is that to think of local decisions as games. So basically, what you do as social influence is a local coordination. So basically, you want to smoke if your friends are smoking. This is something that you coordinate, and this is a coordination game. Of course, if you all smoke, then it's worse off because your health is ruined. But also, if you, for instance, you can also have fun together if you was. But it's also, if one is smoking, the other one is not, then it's really disturbing for one person. The other one is also not having that much fun. So this is an example that image the influence, typical social influence that is taking place by adopting smoking behavior can be modeled as a coordination game as well. So of course here you can have different strategies. That you don't just adopt a local majority decision. It's something like here. So what is already implemented in a lot of models, but you can also think of the exact payoffs that smoking gives you, and joint smoking gives you, and asymmetric smoking gives you, and then implement this kind of payoffs in the utility function of basically just what you want to maximize in single step. But you can also think one more step forward to think about the payoffs of your friends, and you give a best response to what you expect that they are going to choose. So this is already done, I think, in a couple of models, but this is going to be very complex, of course. And of course, sometimes you also want to get the trade-off that you don't to build a very complex model already at the very beginning. You probably want to do it step by step. And the last possibility, and I think that also links back to Federico's talk, is that we often think of social networks as just one kind of network, but we are living in multiplex networks that have very different ties. And if you have very different ties, then what comes immediately into the consideration, and this also leads back to Emanuel Lazagas's work, is that also, or to the social exchange theory, literature and sociology, is that you can exchange positions. So for instance, or you can also exchange in one type of network the behavior you have in exchange to another kind of behavior that is more pleasing to your friend in another kind of network if you are both connected in both kind of ways. So this is something that is not just mixed reciprocity, but something also considering one step further what the other things. Also, you can also go one step further what the other things that I'm going to change in the other layer if he's going to take this position. And of course, what is also neglected very often is that some individuals have larger power, larger authority to change the behavior of others. So basically, we are not completely autonomic in the sense that we can decide about everything. And some actors have more power to act basically and influence others because of their authoritarian position or because of just simply can employ coercion towards others. So of course, this is very often neglected, but this also could be taken into account, especially if you can come to this multiplexity world and can apply multiplex networks. How am I doing with time?
This is a case in which there is someone playing coercion. There's an extent.
Okay, so then I want to finish this, and then I'm not going to do it because I also have an example, but I will not talk about the example. So that also, of course, it's also possible to start from a games and interactions world and try to implement the insights that were there already in this opinion dynamics network framework or the some world that are gained so far and was completely overviewed by or overlooked by the tradition of games and networks. And one insight I think is that you can have even if you have a strategic choice, you can have strategic influence in a sense that you manipulate the opportunities or the frames of what the others have. And this is very, very often actually employed in real situations. And also you can also have difference to what extent you are susceptible to influence. Although you could have the same utility function, but some individuals are more susceptible than others. Of course, to some extent, this is therefore this is an empirical nuance on kind of opinion dynamics models, and then could also be taken into the simple into account to games networks. Also, of course, if you have preferences that are beyond the simple utilities that you can obtain from the games that you play, for instance, for having friends or having the welfare of your family, then you can also think of nepotist network building in the sense that you build your network at the same time you want to maximize your payoff, but you also care about the payoff of your friends. So basically, your network formation will be something as a result of those two kinds of preferences. And of course, the last opportunity is that you can also coordinate influence. And that's also, if you have strategic choices, then basically two people at the same time would like to convince you that, okay, it's better to cooperate. That is, of course, much more influential than just one people wants to convince you. And of course, also here, coercion can also be thought of as an additional thing, especially if you have exchange of behavior and protection. So there's something to offer also from the authoritarian person, that there is protection, for instance, that you are secured to play this game, for instance, a couple of times more. Then you can also exchange this kind of favor that you are allowed to play one more game. That okay, I give in, and then I in a coordination game I choose the option that is more favorable to you. Okay, so this is just then it can be the concluding slide because then I don't go to the examples. But of course, both worlds have a lot of problems, and even the integration will not have these kind of problems. But you can have in any of the worlds separately these kind of problems. For instance, homogeneity. A lot of times we think that the agents have the same kind of preferences, at least the preference function looks the same, or the same kind of opportunities, the same strategy set, or also update rules. So basically that these are just homogeneity, that you can just think of different people. And another problem is that in real worlds we have very complex tasks, collective tasks, that need specialization. So basically from the top, you would like to have a division of labor, which is basically the increases efficiency And of course, why do I want to specialize in certain kind of activity that is not my interest? So this is a problem that has been solved by humanity, but not really integrated in any of the models. The next problem, and of course, that is very relevant in a lot of network applications, that sometimes you don't know where the network boundaries are. And of course, network modeling is very difficult if the boundaries are not strict, and the networks are multiplex, and some of the layers are not very well observed. And very often we have relational events, the dynamic was mentioned. So like relational events rather than ties, or the combination of events and ties that creates a lot of complications. Then I stop here. I don't go to the example because I think that I'm already over time. Thank you very much.
Let's keep a couple of minutes for any question from our audience here online. People clapping their hands in online, so
Virtual class.
yeah, a lot of claps, people clapping. Any question? So I like this idea to bring this game theory stuff because it's a little bit connected with the discussion, because that's obviously game theory provides very solid framework for testing, for instance, in the labs, certain kind of behavioral rules that might be important then to, you know, by analogy to import in our models. Any reaction? Okay.
Other than
Just a mic.
should do this.
Okay, so I'd like to thank again Kari for this brilliant talk, and give floor to Andreas for the next one. Then we'll have some time for coffee. Who's my man?
Okay, first of all, on the technical side, I sent you slides, but I could also just present from my.
I don't know. Every time we move this, it's always.
Show and then logo.
Okay.
Oh, yes.
Because we did it for staff. But also making time at the end of the day and during the coffee breaks. Comments and questions.
So I mean,
You don't have to react.
while Andreas is setting up his talk, I would like to inform that there is plenty of time in the end of this day for question and answer and more open discussion. Okay, so don't desperate. So we have time for that.
I do anticipate.
Yeah, the one that people are looking at. Yeah.
You're right.
Short.
I'm sorry. Are you so long? We don't like that cable.
Ja, heb je gerade die kamer nodig?
Do we need HDMI there?
Yes. Yes.
I would like to connect to that.
You can also have this through HDMI.
Oh, yeah. And we can also inactively simulate if you want.
Maybe Andreas can call into the Teams session and we can share his screen.
Yeah, we can also do that. Do you have Microsoft Teams?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, that could be a nice option.
Do you have the link to our?
Not yet, no.
Email that to you.
Lego sent the email with
Link connection to Teams.
And now needs to connect the teams of Andreas from here so that he can share. But you need to go to the email, and there is the link that
So it's in the mail about the workshop organization and everything.
one of the last email. I'm just reading your email, so it's not. Okay.
No big secrets on that.
Yeah, you know. Nobody knows.
give you a phone number, but not a team
Found the
link.
link?
You know what? I think we can just, I would just tell you what happens in
No,
the simulation.
this is Federico, can you just come here and see?
I'm emailing.
Email che hai mandato.
No, this is.
I just emailed it to you.
Okay, so.
Go to your email. I just emailed it to you.
Oh, yes.
Let me.
Oh, no, this is really, I'm reading your email, all right? I told you, I mean, I don't. So in the meantime, we have found a safer place for our coffee breaks and lunch and so a little bit more, yeah. Don't worry. Yes, across also. Work at but sort of.
Yeah, that works. Like everybody decided to do construction, first the dogs, then the construction, like chaos. This is what you don't get also, you know, the actual real life. It's the stress and the technical.
Next,
Yeah, but it's trying to do this. Yeah.
Another question.
Just need to mute. You just need to mute your laptop.
Shit. Just click on the.
okay.
It's one of his thoughts.
No.
So we're pretty close to the solution.
Yes.
Let us screen allow.
Yeah.
Yes, still so.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Hey, well. This one here. Well, sorry for the complications. Also sorry that the title wasn't in the program. That was a bit a matter of trying to hit a moving target, but in the end, this is what I came up with. But before I embark on this topic, let me first say thanks a lot to Federico, to Flaminio, and Rafaela for organizing this wonderful workshop. I just looked up in my email, I think it was in somewhere 2018, when Philip, Jen, myself, Aloy, Federico's came up with this thought we should organize a session bringing together social networks and ABM. And I think at that time we were looking at, oh, would there be enough people interested in this? Now see what happens. Here's this wonderful community of people and many more people online. So I think we really tapped on this very important, and I'm excited to see the great work and great interest also in this line of research. So more specifically, I want today to talk about this topic. I want to get rid of this thing. Well, no, okay. About this topic, so modeling the complexity of contact from an agent-based model to empirical data and perhaps back to the model. And of course, it's more of a cycle like modeling, learning something from data, sticking it, and so on. Well, let me start from a bit of background of this. I think one important background for being interested in this topic is the concern we have about polarization in our societies. And can anyone?
Yeah, we can just close the pop-up.
I can have it. This help? No, it doesn't help. Because it's not, I cannot see it.
It's pop-up.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
That's it. Thank you. So effective, I mean, we hear a lot of talk about polarization. Those who are into this literature know that at the moment the discussion is mainly about what's called effective polarization. So polarization, the idea, let's say in a population, people increasingly disagree more and more and more on certain topics. The population falls apart into two groups who are so opposed to each other that there's little common ground left, which of course can be a problem inside society in all sorts of regards. But empirical work suggests on many issues, many important political, social issues, there is actually not that much extreme polarization as this literature might suggest. But what we seem to see is an increasing extent, at least as you find here in literature about the US, but also other societies, of so-called effective polarization, where effective polarization means groups look at each other increasingly negative, so have increasingly negative views of each other. I always find quite clear these examples of research showing that if you ask Democrats and Republicans in the US, things like, would you marry your daughter to someone of the other political camp? People increasingly say, no, I wouldn't want to do that. These people cannot be trusted, they're not intelligent, they are not all sorts of things. So that's a concern, effective polarization. And if you think about it from the perspective of dynamic analysis, which we do here, you would think, well, probably this once this gets started, it can become self-reinforcing dynamics, right? So people may have to a certain extent negative attitudes. That may lead to increasingly negative interactions. So once you interact with people on the other, you perceive this interaction as something negative. That may strengthen actually your negative output attitude. Next time around, your interactions are likely to be even more negative, and so on, and so on. And we got this in some work we did, a spin out spiral, mutually reinforcing negative attitudes. So that would be a concern. But then, as probably, or many of you, of course, know, oh, what? Wait, is this not working? Yes. There's a very prominent theory in social psychology, so-called contact theory, which has been actually around long before we had this debate on polarization. And it also describes, in a dynamic perspective, a self-reinforcing process. You could say, well, we start out from, on the individual basis, relational basis, having positive interactions with members from other groups. That improves our attitudes as a whole. The idea of contact theory. Well, that can make our interactions next time around more likely positive. That improves our outgroup attitude, and so on and so on. So we have here two self-reinforcing dynamics driven by maybe similar mechanisms, but going into totally different directions. That's already probably the case for modeling, trying to figure out better what's going on, what are the conditions in which one or the other thing that might happen, and so on. But it's actually even more complicated. So when we talk about contact improving attitudes towards the outgroup, we focus on social relations between members of different groups. We're interested in what happens in those relations. How does that affect their attitude? How do these interactions unfold? Fair enough. But simultaneously and at the same time, people are also interacting within their own groups. And that in the empirical literature looking into this gets recognized, well, in recent years, increasingly. So people call this now sometimes socialization. People within their own groups discussing about the other group, shaping their attitudes about the other group, but also about their own group. And that could already counteract the contact theory effect, right? If my friends are prejudiced and I talk to my prejudiced friends, then maybe that will just take away the positive effect that my positive interaction with an outgroup member had yesterday. So that's another complication. things are getting even more complicated because, as we are discussing here, of course, social ties can change over time. There is, for example, ethnic homophily. So even if these between group relations have positive effects on our attitudes, they might unravel the very relations before these effects actually really become strong. And then, and this is now a calmer mode in disguise, of course, that is the macro interaction. All this is talking about what happens in relations between individuals, but how this aggregates up to the collective level is yet another complicated question. Right, so if we would try to figure this out without invoking modeling, probably that would going to happen to us, our heads would explode. So fortunately, we do have agent-based and computational modeling to help us. That's a very old picture. To help us to get a better understanding. So this is what we try to do in some of the research I want to talk about. We start first from the theoretical side. So we develop a computational agent-based model trying to capture all these dynamics. This is joint work with Alain Loseba, who is here, PhD student in the ICS in Groningen, and Jari Roth, a former PhD student. And what we do in this work is try to model what happens on the individual level. First of all, from a social influence perspective. And well, Karl was already talking about opinion dynamics models. So in principle, this is an opinion dynamic. The idea is if ego and outer meet, they influence each other's opinions on a certain topic. The topic can be, what do we think of our own group, or what do we think of the other? Well, if ego and outer belong to the same group, then ego's opinion about that group influences outer's opinion about that group. Same for the own group and for the other. If ego and outer do not belong to the same group, then the object own group for ego is the object other group for outer. So my attitude towards my group influences outer's attitude towards outer's towards my group, which is the outcome for outer. So this is basically in the core of the opinion dynamics model that we are developing or have developed. And this extends earlier work, so I made a first shot at this kind of model, but this was much more simplistic than what we are doing now. Okay, and as those of you knowing opinion dynamics models will quickly recognize, in this kind of model, we assume there could be two kinds of influence processes going on. So on the one hand, if say the discrepancy between two individuals who interact is relatively small, this interaction will be positive in the sense that their opinions will converge. But if the discrepancy is very large, their opinions may diverge. They may actually try to distance themselves from the view of the others, and this builds on many earlier models. But the thing in this particular model is that there are three things affecting the discrepancy. So on the one hand, it's how much do you and me disagree on these topics. The other thing is, do we belong to the same group or not? And here's a key variable I want to talk about today. We call this entrenched xenophobia. So in a society with a lot of entrenched xenophobia, even if we agree a lot, even if I like your group a lot, there may still be a strong element like, but you, because you belong to the other group, it's still more likely that our interaction will be negative than if we would not belong to the same. So that's the third ingredient here. What is my attitude towards your group? And this can change. This can change as a consequence of social. So these are the three main ingredients that define how we look at each other and how the interaction will unfold. Of course, for us here, a given thing, there is not just influence in the interaction between two people, but there is selection. So the social network itself changes. There is a dynamic in the social network. And basically, the same discrepancy affects also that dynamic in social interactions. So the lower the discrepancy I experience to you, the more likely I want to interact with you, the more likely I select you as an interaction partner when given the opportunity. And this is basically how we build up then the simulation process. First, we pick an agent at random. Then the agent selects an interaction partner from, say, the menu of all available interaction partners. The less discrepancy there is, the more likely we are going to interact. If there's entrenched xenophobia, that means already I'm less likely to interact with people from the outgroup or other things in the group. But if the interaction takes place, then we have the social influence process, and it could be positive or negative. The less discrepancy, the more likely it's to be positive, which means if there's entrenched xenophobia, if the interaction is going to take place between outgroup members or between members from different groups, more likely to be negative or other things to be. Right. We could, and we actually did, investigate quite a lot of questions with this kind of modeling theoretically. Well, I'll have run lots of simulations, made graphs, and so on. But I want to show you only focus on one particular thing we did here today. We looked into this question. So what happens if there is some degree of this entrenched xenophobia? Could we expect, based on such a model, that contact would then still help to improve outgroup attitudes, and under what conditions would that be the case? And entrenched xenophobia means even if the interaction between people from different groups improves attitudes towards the outgroup, there is still, even next time around, it's less likely to, these interactions are less likely to happen. And they are more likely to be negative than positive, because this xenophobia is not just taken away by some positive direction. It's still around. So now I describe a bit the baseline scenario of some simulation I'm going to show you in a minute. I call this a psychologically plausible scenario, not the first line here, so that there are only two groups and there are only 110 people in the world. That's not psychologically plausible. Give me that. But what is a bit psychologically plausible, at least? Well, we assume, unlike in many of the other opinion dynamics models, that there's an initial attitude bias. So you feel more positively about your own group than about the other. That's what we know from empirical research. That's how we are as human beings, mostly. There is a certain degree of this entrenched phobia, and that's the parameter I want to vary. There is negative influence, but unlike, again, in many of the other opinion dynamics models, it actually kicks only in if the discrepancy is really high. And this reflects empirical results we know, for example, from research we did with Kawa in the past, suggesting that if at all negative influence happens in interactions between people, the conditions must be really bad to make it happen. Typically, we would influence each other positively if we're doing it. Okay. And then we assume that this xenophobia is to some degree entrenched. It does not simply change the problems in interactions between people from different groups, even if there have been some positive interactions in the past. Now the question is, can context still work? And I go now to some simple simulations I want to show you. They are not capturing exactly that scenario. I will show you more results about that scenario in a minute. But this shows here a smaller population for better visualization and so on. So this is the attitude space, attitudes towards group 1, attitudes towards group 0. And basically you see the red people are in that corner, the white people are in that corner, meaning you think more positively about your own group and more negatively about the out group compared to the in group. Now one question, and this is now with say mild entrenched xenophobia. One question is what happens to the social networks. So let's see where the positive links are between people. Well, there are quite a few positive links, not only between people from the same group, but also between people from different groups. And where are the negative links here? Well, there are a few, obviously.
And they are mainly between people from different groups. So that's sort of the starting situation. And now I run the simulation and I visualize the dynamic of the positive links while the simulation is running. And then something like this happens. So these positive links on the whole override the few negative links that are there. And as you see here, the attitudes towards the outgroup move upwards. Towards the upwards. The attitudes towards the in-group actually move a bit downwards. And that is because it's a social influence model. So I think very positively about my own group. You don't. As an outgroup member, we interact. That makes me move a bit towards your opinion, and you move more towards my opinion. Because for me, it's the in-group opinion, for you, it's the outgroup opinion. Result, outgroup attitudes improve. The other side, in-group attitudes become a bit worse. So that's an implication of this kind of model, despite these relatively problematic starting situations. Now, I can make this entrenched xenophobia a bit stronger. And we can look again at the positive links. Well, there are still a few between the groups, but not so many anymore, right? But those which are still there are mainly between individuals who don't disagree that much. Because that's one other ingredient of what makes you have a positive link. You need some degree of agreement with each other. Negative links, yes, quite a few more. Now, if we run the simulation, see? Slowly, but gradually, you see these two groups moving apart from each other, and we have clear effective polarization. So everyone ends up loving the in-group, hating the out. Same model, only a relatively small change in the initial conditions. Right. Okay. You can, of course, do this more systematically. This is what we see for the initial, very benign scenario, very low level of entrenched xenophobia. Opinions converge and outgroup attitudes improve. And if we then change this entrenched xenophobia parameter more systematically across the whole range, we see that in this part down here, contact works. So this is as contact theory would expect it. Attitudes, outgroup attitudes at the end, so to say, of the dynamic have improved relative to their initial level. And then somewhere around here, this effect fades away. And from here, we see the outbreak of effective polarization. But now, does more effective polarization mean always less or stronger entrenched xenophobia mean always less positive outgroup attitudes? No, because there's something going on here. Here at the end, entrenched xenophobia is extremely high, and we see less effective polarization. That's due to the interplay of two of these processes are outgroup avoidance and negative interactions if interactions take place. And here the outgroup avoidance takes over, and members from different groups basically avoid each other to such an extent that the negative influence that would have has little impact on what happens at the aggregate level to the attitudes. So that's sort of a interesting nonlinearity, if you want, in these results. I could tell you much more about this model. I don't. Instead, I want to discuss a bit, well, how could we come from such a model, or how can we come from such a model to empirical data and back to the model? And I just want to give a glimpse on three strategies, how you can do this. And I can afford to do this because two of these strategies will be presented more extensively in this workshop, in the presentation by Ttis and in the presentation by Alain. The first one I want to talk about briefly now. So one thing we can and should do in this kind of work, I believe, is use the ABM to identify the critical assumptions. So what are really the assumptions that make a difference for the dynamic of the model, for the outcomes of the model? And one very critical assumption in this kind of models is always this assumption of negative. So logical step is then, well, can we somehow test this more in a lab setting where we can really isolate, pin down conditions, isolate this particular process? That's what we did in recent work, what I published in recent work in this wonderful journal here. And shift, it's over there. And this is, of course, not something totally new. It builds on earlier work. Well, we started doing this together with Carboy, right, in 2016. An experiment had been published where we tried to test this assumption of negative influence in certain directions. Basically, a very similar design to what we did in the recent paper with Marijn Kaiser. So people are exposed to opinions of others. The difference in opinions may vary, and what we wanted to, you may get information about the other party, which makes you feel less positively about the other party. And what we wanted to know is, do we then really see negative influence in the sense that people distance their opinion away from the others? Well, basically, the answer we gave Carboy and we gave in this paper was, we don't find a lot of evidence for that. Actually, no evidence really for it. That was one of the reasons why this experiment by Marijn Kaiser. This was extended to an online setting. We did more sophisticated things to vary opinions, communicated them, for example, via so-called moral foundations, cues in the text messages people got from others, giving them a bit of a sense this person belongs to a different ideological camp than I do, and so on. And here's the main result. Still, we find also there that people tend to move towards the message from the source, but it happens less so if the source is ideologically distant. And there's a weak tendency towards this negative or repulsive influence in interactions, particularly, by the way, among right-wing participants in our experiment. Of course, then you can ask yourself, and I skip this slide now, what happens if we import these inference functions that we derive from the experimental data, simulation model? And that's what we did here. And what this graph basically shows you, if you increase the extent to which people interact with, can interact with others with foreign attitudes, foreign opinions, we still see polarization declining. If there were only this negative influence in the model, the opposite should happen, but it doesn't. So a combination of a number of mechanisms in the simulation model together with importing this empirically estimated influence function tells us the negative influence we find in the experiments is not strong enough to induce polarization. That's sort of an optimistic message. Of course, much too early to conclude, well, we shouldn't worry about polarization anymore. We need, of course, more sophisticated work linking these models to empirical insights. And given the time, I will now only briefly mention there's a second strategy we can apply. And Tan will explain this much more in detail in his presentation. Again, this focuses on testing this assumption on negative influence, but this time around, we really go to the network data, to the longitudinal coevolution data, and this case, the Arnhem school study, and we control for all sorts of simultaneous additional mechanisms going on in this network dynamic and influence processes observed in the data. And I just mentioned that the main result of conscious work is, yes, there is support for that social influence is gone. That negative is going. For that, by the way, new RCNI effects needed to be programmed, and they were programmed by the master himself at Science. But again, they are not strong enough to really aggregate up to strong polarization levels. That's what Pancho will tell you more in detail about later. Then there's the third strategy, And now, basically, we do the same thing, but now this links more to really integral attitudes. And for this, we now take in work with Alain Luceva and Christian, myself, Sabine Otten, social psychologist, and Ttis. We take again co-evolution data, LSNA data, school classes, multi-ethnic school classes, the Ttis data set, friendships in schools data set, estimate a number of these processes important in the context theory dynamic talking about at the outset. And then use these empirically estimated models to simulate forward and to see, does that really aggregate up? Under which conditions does it aggregate up to polarization? What happens if we do counterfactuals, as we make, for example, xenophobia stronger? Again, the main result here, and Ala will tell you much more about that later, is, you have to push the model really hard to produce a bit of polarization, a bit of this negative spiral. But so far, based on these empirically calibrated data, based on this empirically calibrated model, we could still be moderately optimistic about polarization not breaking out tomorrow, at least in those two classes we have analyzed. Which brings me towards the last slide. And I don't want to summarize a lot and so on, just say, but of course, we still need to do a lot of work to better understand the dynamics of polarization in general and the effect of polarization in particular. Some of these challenges are that we have actually a multitude of these theory-driven models. And it's very hard to know which model is actually different from which other model when it really comes to the implications, the things we can learn from them. So there we need to not do a lot of theoretical work, but also, and I've shown you some of this here, test empirically and try to figure out empirically better how empirically valid are actually the assumptions we make in the models. We need to do theoretical work to link that again to macro data, for example, how attitudes in surveys or in the population and the whole change over time. And then, of course, it's also not so straightforward to immediately apply this then to a phenomenon like a polarization or effective polarization in general, because again, a lot depends on the context, the particular school classes, for example, you look like, or the particular societal context we investigate. So the good news is we all will have a lot of work to do.
This I can inspire the younger generation of people here to take the lead of that. So coffee is just there, and so I would suggest that we postpone reaction and questions to Andres also because there's a couple of interrelated presentations by Tanja and Anna, and we move to the coffee place. I'm sorry, you guys, that online you can't enjoy this. That we offer to the on-site participants, and we will be back at 11:30. Okay, and thank you very much for this brilliant first session. And so the coffee is in the entrance of the building, so the main building. I'm Bianchi. Thank you very much. See you.